Hi, y'all, and welcome to tonight's live stream. How's long will this go on? We are still waiting for the jury. We are still waiting for an answer to the question of whether or not Karen Read is going to be convicted. Is she going to be convicted of murdering her boyfriend, John O'Keefe? And we're waiting and we're waiting, and we don't know the answer. Now, this is saying that no one is in here, and I see all the people in the chat. Is this like the world's longest commercial or what is happening here? Let me go down to the bottom, make sure I'm not missing anything. It says I'm live. Oh, good. There, people popped up. Okay. I wondered about what was happening. Okay. So, as I said, we're waiting. How many of you were on OnlyFan all day today? Just watching that white fan spinning around and around and around, and nothing. The jury is still out. What is going on? I want to talk about that tonight. I also want to talk about the clue that I think everybody missed. And I'm going to talk about why I think this might be taking so long, what the judge is likely to do about it. And I want to talk too about what happens if the jurors don't agree, and what happens if there's a hung jury. Just what does all of this mean? We're going to go through all of that. And of course, we're going to have our AI summary of the day. So let's start with welcoming the first 5 who were in the chat, who weren't here, weren't in the first 5 other days this week. So it's Raquel Saper, Robin McBroom, Sea Dog, Gitmo Holiday. Uh-oh, that's only 4. I put Robin in there twice. Well, tell you what, I'll zip on up and see who it was. I hate to miss you if you were number 5 and you were wondering. Well, will Lee remember? Tell you what, maybe I'll add that later. I'm sorry about that. I didn't get it. Okay, so we are not the only ones who are wondering about what on earth is happening. There were just primal screams in the chat I was watching. In the chat of the live stream I was watching, when the judge came back and announced that the jury was going to go home for the day, that they weren't going to have a verdict. And I can only imagine how Karen Read must feel. She looked very stressed yesterday when she walked out to the car, and after 2 days, that's even worse. You think about her family, her father, and of course, you think about the victims. You think about John O'Keefe's brother, who sits right there, Paul, front and center, or to the side, maybe would be a better way to put it. You think about John O'Keefe's parents. You think about the family. The stress for everybody is brutal. And I wanted to show you, we got a visible reaction today from Paul O'Keefe, John's brother. I think this would probably have to be like meme of the day. So this is when the court comes back and says the jury is going home for the day. There's not going to be a verdict. And here's what happened. She's called the sidebar. There you go. There's John O'Keefe. Sorry, Paul O'Keefe. So I'm going to play it a couple times in case you missed it. So what's happened is the judges said, everybody come on up to the bar. There's not sound with it because they turned the sound off for the sidebar. And you see John O'Keefe go, oh no. So I played it a couple of times so you can I can make sure you saw it. Which is exactly how I think everybody was feeling today. Everybody feeling like, no, we can't keep going. We can't keep going. And for him, of course, the stress is so much greater than even for everybody else. So the stress extends really far beyond the people in the courtroom. It extends to the city of Canton. We saw quite the melee this weekend in Canton with people who were arguing over the case. And in fact, since it's such a public trial, it extends to us as well. Now, yesterday we talked about the fact that jury questions can be clues. And yesterday there were questions from the jury. So we got some of those Easter eggs, some of those clues that lawyers look for. And we analyzed, what do we think they mean? What could possibly what could the jury be thinking? What does it signal? And I did a poll, you may remember, and I said, well, it could be, or after our live, I did a poll, and I did one on the live too, but it wasn't a true poll, but I did one on YouTube. And I said, how many of you think that they're struggling? And so the reason they were able to say to the judge at 9:45 in the morning, hey, we're going to need to leave. We're going to need to break about 4 so somebody can get home, is they knew for a fact they were going to be there all day. And what's the reason for that? And we went through the poll on that. But we didn't get anything like that today because there were no questions from the jury. We just didn't get anything like that. So the one thing we did get is the fact that the judge called the lawyers up for a sidebar right after the jury announced that it was going to go home for the day. That wouldn't necessarily mean anything, but I want you to hear what the judge said. Give it just a second.
Jurors, we all appreciate how hard you've been working, and I understand you'd like to stop for the day, so we will certainly do that. We appreciate everything you're doing. I do have to give you those same precautions. Please do not discuss this case with anyone. Don't do any independent research or investigation into this case. If you happen to see, hear, or read anything about this case, please disregard it and let us know. Clear your heads. We'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, let me focus in on the part that I think might actually have been a small clue. It's nothing significant, but I think it might be a clue.
If you happen to see, hear, or read anything about this case, please disregard it and let us know. Clear your heads. We'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, so the part I'm hearing and that I'm thinking might be a clue is the part where she adds, clear your heads. She hadn't said that on other days. And why would she say that if there wasn't something they needed to overcome, if they weren't having some difficulty? So it made me think that maybe they're having some difficulty and disagreeing. Now, obviously, they could just be going through evidence, simply looking at the evidence to make sure they're getting it right. They could just be discussing what they think, and they're all going to easily reach a consensus. But that extra comment she made suggests to me that she may be aware that they're having trouble, and that may be what was discussed at the sidebar. So as we get into it, if you would, please hit the like button and subscribe. We would love to have you come back for more videos. So let's talk for just a minute about why it could be very difficult for the jury to make a decision. And the public, of course, is eager for a result, anxious for the result. Most people are thinking, I can decide this easily. Why is this hard? Why does it take them any time at all? But there are a couple of reasons, I think, that make it more difficult for them. The first is they're having to put all this together after 8 weeks of trial, really by themselves. They don't get to go out and watch commentaries and see lawyers commenting about it. They've just got what they saw, and they've got to kind of digest it and put it together. And then the second reason is they don't just have to do that for themselves. It's one thing to make your choice internally, what you think, but it's quite another to have your ideas and try to mesh those with 11 other people who have everybody at least slightly different ideas. So that's part of the reason I think it's so hard for them. Really, it would almost be shocking if they completely agreed. It would be not at all shocking for them to disagree when you look at the sort of arguments that are going on in the public about this case. People really disagree. Saturday night, there was a sort of wild-looking confrontation in downtown Canton between Turtle Boy, who supports Karen Reed, and between some of the Albert family who owned the restaurant next to where he was eating. So there was also more drama at the Canton Commission meeting earlier this week. So it's not really surprising that 12 people on the jury would have trouble agreeing. Now, a couple of points. First of all, they are not giving up. Even if they're having disagreements, they're not giving up. They're coming back tomorrow. There's no point at which they said, we want to give up. And so there's no reason to believe that they're doing anything other than trying their hardest to reach an agreement, and they still have at least some hope that that's happening. The second point is, what if just what if they really are having trouble reaching an agreement? Then what happens? I wanted to talk about that. What if they're on their way to becoming a hung jury, if they even are, and there's something the judge will give, which in many jurisdictions is called a dynamite charge. The idea is that when you give this dynamite charge, it's like putting a stick of dynamite under the jury, break up that log jam, get them to make a decision, not just kick the case down the road to another jury. Now, I don't practice in Massachusetts where the case is being tried. I did go to Harvard, which ironically is in Massachusetts, but Harvard really doesn't teach any one state's laws because everybody there is going to disperse to all the different states around the country. So there would be kind of no point to teaching one specific state's laws. But I'm going to show you a document that came from the mass.gov site, and that looks exactly like what I'm used to seeing for a dynamite charge. So if it's not exactly right on point, I think it is. But if it's not, it's going to be very, very close to what I think this judge would be doing, what Judge Canton would be doing. So let me go ahead and add that to the stage. And I'm going to, so thank you, Blair. I appreciate that. And Mitt Spunky for gifting a lawyerly membership. And thank you, Brooke. I appreciate your nice comment too. Let me go ahead and make this a little bit larger to make it easier for everybody to see. And I'm going to take things a little bit out of order. I've got it all numbered. Those are notes to me, more or less, about how I'm going to march through it. So the larger type, I'll just go ahead and explain. See that larger type there? That's the charge that the jury would have read, that the judge would read to the jury. These are down here below. These are notes, and the people who write the instructions write these notes for lawyers, for the judge, so that everybody can take a look at it and get some extra thoughts about what they were thinking when they wrote that charge for the jury. So that's what you're looking at. So I'm going to start with the smaller section, which is the notes. And it says the model instruction above and the alternate instruction below. So there are two different ones here, are adapted from the two alternative models set out in, and they name a Massachusetts case. The first is an amended version of a traditional charge developed from a case. The second, a model charge recommended by the American Bar Association. That is an organization that it's a voluntary organization, but it's an organization that many lawyers belong to and represents lawyers nationally across the country. So it is appropriate for the judge to give such a charge when the jury is deadlocked, meaning they don't agree. Some think guilty, some think not guilty, or in a civil case, the different standard, but in criminal, guilty and not guilty, and they don't agree. It says when they're deadlocked, but because it has a certain sting to it, it should not be given prematurely. And digression from the recommended language is discouraged. So the translation is, save this. Don't use it unless you have to. This charge is for if you have to. And also, don't change the words. Use exactly these words. That way there's no possibility of reversal, or at least less. So at least not for this ground. So now I want to take a look at what the jury will hear if they are deadlocked. What I think this is very close to what the judge will read to them if they're ultimately deadlocked. Our Constitution and laws provide that in a criminal case, the principal way for deciding questions of fact is the verdict of a jury. In most cases, and perhaps strictly speaking, in all cases, absolute certainty cannot be attained or expected. So they're lowering the jury's expectations. You aren't supposed to be 100% certain. It's supposed to be beyond a reasonable doubt, not 100% doubt-free. The verdict to which each juror agrees must, of course, be his or her own verdict, the result of his or her own convictions, and not merely an acquiescence in the conclusion of the other jurors. So in other words, don't just give in to what everybody else thinks. Still, in order to bring 6 minds, this would be 12, to a unanimous result, you must examine the issues you have to decide with candor and with a proper regard and respect for each other's opinions. You should consider that it is desirable that the case be decided. You should consider that you have been selected in the same manner and from the same source as any future jury would be. This is all very interesting in here. I love this sentence. There is no reason to suppose that the case will ever be submitted to 6, read 12 persons who are more intelligent, more impartial, or more competent to decide it than you are, or that more or clearer evidence will be produced on one side or the other. With all this in mind, it is your duty to decide this case if you can do so conscientiously. So, in other words, don't be thinking there's some magic jury out there that's going to be able to handle this case when you can't. You are the magic jury. There's no better group out there. There is no perfect group. This is it. And that part in the middle where it says it is desirable that the case be decided. We're going to talk about that and why it very much is. So in order to make a decision more attainable, the law always imposes the burden of proof on one side or the other. In this criminal case, the burden of proof is on the Commonwealth to establish every part of it, every essential element beyond a reasonable doubt. If you are left in doubt as to any essential element, the defendant is entitled to the benefit of the doubt and must be acquitted. In conferring together, you ought to give proper respect to each other's opinions and listen with an open mind to each other's arguments. Where there is disagreement, those jurors who are for acquittal should consider whether a doubt in their own minds is a reasonable one. If it makes no impression on the minds of other jurors who are equally honest, equally intelligent, and who have heard the same evidence with the same attention, with an equal desire to arrive at the truth, and who have taken the same oath as jurors. On the other hand, those jurors who are for conviction ought seriously to ask themselves whether they may not reasonably doubt the correctness of their judgment if it is not shared by other members of the jury. They should ask themselves whether they should distrust the weight or adequacy of the evidence if it has failed to convince the minds of their fellow jurors. So in other words, the jury's being told, ask yourself if maybe, just possibly, you are wrong. Maybe you're the one who's wrong. If you look around you and no one else agrees with you, everybody else reasonably trying to get this case solved and they all disagree with you, maybe you're the one who's in the wrong. At least ask yourself that question. And then the judge says, I would ask you now to return to your deliberations with these thoughts in mind. Now, that may not be the exact wording. This does come from the mass.gov site, but there may be different wording that's actually used by the courts. But I think that's pretty much what I would expect from a dynamite charge. That's pretty common. And then let's read down in the notes again. Subject to the limitations of, and it's a section we're going to read in just a minute, or a note about it in just a minute. There is no per se rule that giving such a charge more than once is inherently coercive. And that's one thing that does happen in some places. The jury comes out, they say we can't decide. The judge reads the charge. They go back, they come out, we say we can't decide. The judge reads the charge again. They go back, and how long are you going? How long will that go on? You have to ask yourself. The judge should not mention to the jury the possible expense or inconvenience of a second trial. In other words, the jury shouldn't be forced to agree because you guilt trip them. You shouldn't tell them, look, this is going to cost you and your fellow taxpayers a lot of money. If we have to go through this whole process again, this is going to be expensive and it's going to all be on you. That's not the way they should be deciding. That's not one of the factors they should be considering. So the judge shouldn't tell them about that. Let's go down to the note below the second charge. Pre-Tui Rodriguez charge, which is what this was called, when the jury, based on the cases it came from, when the jury prematurely suggests that it may be at an impasse, but the judge concludes that the jury is not yet deadlocked and that a full Tui Rodriguez charge is not yet called for. So they're having trouble, but it's not called for. The appeals court recommends that the judge instruct the jury using the ABA recommended language in the first two paragraphs of the alternate instruction. We're going to look at that in just a minute. It seems reasonable to us that the jury's perception be acknowledged in some fashion. In so doing, a judge must exercise caution that the jury not be encouraged to give up the effort to reach unanimity while at the same time ensuring that the jurors understand that conscientious disagreement is nevertheless acceptable. So they're telling the judge and the lawyers in the case, saying, don't go straight to that big charge we read, that one that says, everybody think about whether you're wrong. Don't start with that. Instead, start with this kind of light version that comes from the American Bar Association and just read the first couple of paragraphs of it. Do that first, but don't do any of that until you really have to. Here's what the second version said. This is the ABA version. The verdict must represent the considered judgment of each juror. In order to return a verdict, it is necessary that each juror agree to that verdict. Your verdict must therefore be unanimous, which is pretty much what they've already been told. It is your duty as jurors to consult with one another and to deliberate with a view to reaching an agreement if you can do so without violating your individual judgment and conscience. Each of you must decide the case for yourself, but you should do so only after considering the evidence impartially with your fellow jurors. In the course of your deliberations, do not hesitate to re-examine your own views and change your opinion if you become convinced that it is erroneous. But do not surrender your honest conviction as to the weight or effect of the evidence solely because of the opinion of your fellow jurors or for the mere purpose of returning a verdict. I don't know why the last two paragraphs didn't make the cut. I'll read them to you. You are not partisans for one side or the other. You are judges of the facts. Your sole interest is to ascertain the truth from the evidence in the case. I would ask you now to return to your deliberations with these thoughts in mind. You can see that's much less pushy than that first instruction. It's much milder. It's just, hey, why don't you be willing to re-examine but don't surrender your honest conviction. It almost maybe is counter to what I think they want to do. I'm not really sure that this is going to be very effective, but that's the next step. Really, that's the first step. If the jury is having trouble and this is the first step. That's what the judge does. Only then does the judge reach the other step. And here's why the judge wants to be super careful about that. Let's go back to the notes. Restriction on sending out jury more than twice. If a jury, after due and thorough deliberation, return to court without having agreed on a verdict, the court may state anew the evidence or any part thereof, explain to them anew the law applicable to the case, and send them out for further deliberation. But if they return a second time without having agreed on a verdict, they shall not be sent out again without their own consent, unless they ask from the court some further explanation of the law. So that means this is a one-shot deal. This is a one-time stick of dynamite. That may not be true in every jurisdiction, but it is true at least here. And like I say, I believe these to be the correct instructions that would be applied here, but I don't practice in Massachusetts, so we would defer to somebody who does. It's very standard from what you see, except that that particular charge that you can only do once, that wouldn't be the case in every jurisdiction, but certainly is a reasonable thing that you might expect. Regardless of which instruction is utilized, after the jury has twice engaged in due and thorough deliberation. And what that means is they've engaged in it, and then they come back and they say, we can't decide. We can't. And the judge reads the dynamite charge, and then they go back and they engage in due and thorough deliberation, and they come back. That's twice. They've done it twice. The judge may not send them out again without their consent. To avoid subsequent problems with Section 34, it is suggested that the judge state clearly for the record whenever the judge determines that a potential impasse has not occurred after due and thorough deliberation. So what this note is telling the judge is you can only do this once. And if this applies in Massachusetts, that will be, and it is on the mass.gov site, then that will be the rule that Judge Canoni has to follow. So she'll have to avoid doing that. The American Bar Association one doesn't count. It's sort of like a free push. So they're having a little bit of trouble. Give them that. They come back and say, nope, we can't. give them the dynamite charge, they go out again. And if that's it, then that's at the point at which the judge says, okay, it's a hung jury. And at that point, the court is saying, be very clear. If for some reason you don't believe that that impasse came after due and thorough deliberation, you need to say that. If you think that they didn't, if you gave them the dynamite charge, they went back for 5 minutes and came back and said, no, we still can't, and you don't think that was due and thorough, then you need to go ahead and say that on the record, that I don't count that. I don't think that was due and thorough. You got to try harder than that. So let me pull this out and there we go. So we can talk. So that is sort of an outline of the basic structure of what kind of happens when the jury can't decide. And that's the basic format that would be true in just about any jurisdiction here in the United States. If the jury can't decide, they're going to get that dynamite charge that's going to say, go back, try again. In some jurisdictions, that happens more than once. It appears that in Massachusetts, it might only happen once, but that the American Bar Association instruction doesn't count. So you could kind of call that more than once, but technically only once. So I am curious if you have some questions about that, and I'm going to go ahead and do something I don't normally do. I'm going to interrupt here, take a few questions on this, and let's talk about it. Like I say, I'm going based off what typically happens, and this looks to me like it fits, but I don't want to step out on a limb and say this is definitely what they do in Massachusetts, since I don't practice there. Okay, and I do want to talk about if you have some questions, if you would go ahead and put the question marks at the beginning, that gives me a much better chance of seeing it. So that would be a big help if you would put that at the beginning. And I want to talk for just a second too about, so well, I'm going to follow up with what happens if there is a hung jury. We're going to talk about that next. That may be what all your questions are about. Oh, indeed. Patricia says, if there is a hung jury, okay, what happens? And can they talk to the public? So if there's a hung jury, then that jury is dismissed, and that jury is free to do what it wants. It can, the members can ask for privacy, and don't have to talk to anybody, but they are free to talk to both sides, to the public, anywhere they want to. They can talk about how they made their conclusions, which did not reach an agreement. They're free and welcome to do that. There's nothing to stop them from doing that. So everybody is going to want to know what went on. That's exactly true, Patricia. So what happens? I'm going to look for some questions here. Okay. With some question marks. Yes, please put those question marks at the beginning. Okay. Sally, if Karen Reed is found not guilty, does that make the Canton Police Department guilty of a cover-up? And what are the repercussions? So no, it doesn't. She could be found not guilty for a reason that had nothing to do with cover-up. She could be found not guilty simply because the state didn't meet its burden of proof. That might not relate to cover-up. That might be due to some piece of evidence or timing that the jury thought the state just didn't prove. So it would be different. I do want to say too, the Canton Police Department is not, I don't think, what's being investigated in the federal investigation. I think that is the Connecticut State Police Trooper Proctor and perhaps other people as well, not necessarily the Canton Police Department. Canton Police recused themselves. There are some ways they sort of reached back into the case at various points. And of course, Karen Reed's car was kept in the Sally Port at the Canton Police Department. Okay, Denise Pelton, what's the next step if there's a hung jury? So here's what happens. If there actually is a hung jury and they get the dynamite charge, they go back and thoroughly deliberate, and they cannot reach agreement, and they come back and the court has to say, you know what, this jury cannot decide. Then she discharges that jury, their duty is over, and now the whole case has to start again. The whole trial would have to begin again. Not right away. There would be a period of time when there would not be, where they would just be prepared and preparing and doing things like that. But there is the theoretical possibility that the Commonwealth could choose not to retry the case. That sometimes happens. The state or the whatever entity looks at the case and says, you know, we don't think we're ever going to do any better than we did. We think it's going to be impossible to convince a jury, and so we're going to let it go. Normally, they don't do that. Normally, what happens is the case gets tried a second time. We saw that happen with Katie Medbanawa in the Charlie Adelson case. She was tried twice because the first time was a hung jury. The second time she was convicted. And that's very common that people will be convicted the second time around. Now, I do want to talk some about the what will happen, what will be different if it gets tried again. Let me go through a few more questions and see, and then I'll get to that. Misconstrue feels like the judge maybe got a note from the jury. I would not be at all surprised at that. I feel like her comment, clear your heads, suggested there had been some kind of communication that this is hard or difficult, or somehow she intuited that it was hard and difficult. It may not have meant anything, but my read of that was that it was something, it mattered. The jury, Shirley wants to know if the jury asked any questions, and not today. They asked questions yesterday, but nothing new or different today, at least not that was shared with us. Dr. Sauce, if they're hung and the trial is held a second time, then becomes hung again, then what? In some states, there is a limit on how many times that you can try somebody. I don't know if that's the case here. In some states, there's no limit. You could try the person over and over again. And if it continued to be a hung jury, you could keep trying it again. It's sort of like a foul ball, something like that. You could keep fouling and there would be no repercussions. You can just keep going, keep fouling. So it would be similar to that. So let me keep going with questions. Villanelle wants to know, do you have a favorite courtroom drama movie? Well, I'll tell you one. What is that one? Oh, it's a new one. Darn it. We joked about Perry Mason the other day. I always loved Perry Mason. It was always the Perry Mason moment where he would, come up with the exact question. Always the villain was on the stand as a regular witness. What is the name of that show that's out right now? Darn it, Lincoln Lawyer. That is a great show. I really like Lincoln Lawyer. So thanks for asking, Villanelle. I mean, I don't think there's a new season, but it's really good. Assurin Fish wants to know, do you have any thoughts on what Yannetti may have told Karen today? Her face lit up and she began nodding enthusiastically. I don't know. I don't know. Have any idea really what they were saying. I don't think the fact that they're having a hard time, if that's what is the case, is necessarily good for her, for Karen Reed. Do you think the sidebar was to tell the attorneys that a decision has been made, but it was late in the day and the jurors wanted to go home early again? I don't think so. I think the judge would have said, if you made a decision, stay right here and let's hear it. I think she would have said that. And I also think the clear your heads means, hey, we gotta go in there fresh tomorrow. Let's go in there fresh. Let me head over and look at the questions too. Helen, thank you. And Matthew, gifting lawyerly memberships. Be sure to turn on your ability to receive memberships if you haven't. So we have had the best time with the members. We have a new emoji for those of you who are members. It's the mind boom emoji created by Marlon, and it is great. It's mind blown, like your mind is blown, and he did a special emoji just for use on the channel. M&T's is talking about the trial. A not guilty verdict will be against the institutions. It certainly does have repercussions because this has been so public and so controversial. It is a statement that will be heard no matter what the actual verdict is. Either way, it's going to be heard. And that's, I think, part of the reason why it's been so controversial. Thank you, Patricia and Doxy Mom. I'm going to stop right there for just a minute. And I want to talk about what it will mean, and I'll come back to more questions, what I think it will mean for each side if, in fact, Karen Reed, if the jury can't reach a decision about whether Karen Reed is guilty. For the Commonwealth, this is a really expensive proposition because they now have to try this case a second time. And all of those witnesses you saw have to come back. That takes their time. Many of them were employees of the local jurisdiction or the state police. It takes all of their time. It takes the attorneys. It takes the courtroom costs. It's all of those things have to be done at an entirely new time, a second time. It is also something that has been very controversial in the area, very divisive, and it lets it keep going. It just doesn't end if there's a hung jury. On the other hand, the consequences for Karen Read are possibly even worse, I think. First, it's extremely expensive for an individual because her lawyers have been paid for a trial. If they have to do a second trial, they will have to be paid again. It won't be as much because they will already be prepared in a large sense, but it's an 8-week trial. That's a lot of time. And there's always new preparation, an amazing amount of new preparation anytime you try a case the second time. It's also the case that I think Karen Read's team did as well as possible on this particular go-round. It would be hard for them to do as well. And furthermore, everybody on the other side will have heard the questions. So now they know what they're going to be confronting, so they can be better prepared. Now they will have transcripts of what they said before that they can use to cross-examine them. And the attorneys are still very skilled. That's not all going away. It's not like people can make up brand new facts on the second go-round, but it's still the case that some of that vigor will be lost because of the fact that everybody kind of knows what the questions are the second time. It just isn't quite as powerful. A huge wild card in all of that is the federal investigation and not knowing what exactly it's even about, much less what will happen. For example, just what if, mind boom, everybody with all the members put in the mind boom, what if Proctor is in prison the next time the trial happens? Wow, that's really different. Or take the opposite. What if the feds decide no charges against anybody? No charges against Proctor, and then arguably none of that can even be mentioned because the federal government decided not to pursue it, not to do anything about it. Overall, if you look at sort of all those things on balance, I think Karen Read comes out the loser if there is a hung jury. It beats a conviction, obviously, for Karen, but it still has significant repercussions for her, and she doesn't get this behind her. And so I think that's probably the worst of it. Okay, I'm going to head back over in here. We are at Doxy Mom. Thank you, Mary. And I've got a question from Atticus. Oh, not a question, just a comment. Thank you. Yeah, I find that I figured y'all would want to see what a dynamite charge looks like and kind of what it means and how it would be used. So I'm glad that you enjoyed that. The jury has not come back with questions about the instructions, but that's certainly one way. Did you notice that in that instruction, the note below the charge? It said you can only give this once, but it doesn't count if they're asking questions. So if they're asking some questions, you don't have to count that. You can send them back again to redeliberate after you explain the charges one more time. So I'm going to keep going through here. I'm looking for any that are questions, and I see that it's me, Maria wants to know, is it normal for a judge to pick a foreperson before random jury selection? It's obviously very dependent on the jurisdiction. Until the Murdaugh trial, I had never heard of such. I had never had a judge select the foreperson. I was stunned when the Murdaugh judge did that. But apparently it's a thing because now we've already covered 2 cases where that's actually happened. Okay, so I'm going to, there are lots of people to thank, and I will thank everybody, but let me head back over and look at some more questions. Again, please remember to put those question marks at the beginning. Tracy is asking me, how long will the judge allow them to deliberate? Like, I can't imagine this could go on for weeks. That's a horrible thought, isn't it? Every night we'd be coming on at 7 going, well, the jury is still out. I think that everybody will have a breaking point at some point, and the jury will come back and say, we really can't decide, Judge. She'll give this charge, and then they'll come back again and say, we really can't decide, Judge. We weren't kidding. We really can't decide. There is no sign that they are at that point yet. That's a really far down the road point. We just have some suggestions. They're on their third day of deliberation. She said, clear your heads. They've asked they yesterday suggested they were going to be out all day by asking early in the morning to leave by 4. So that gives us some hints that if they are like the public, they have some differences. That's all we really can totally tell from this, is they probably have some differences. Are they going to be able to work it out? We have no reason to think they won't. They're still trying. They haven't given up. There's been no suggestion that they are actually headed out, that they are reaching the point where they can't keep going. So this is just sort of what will unfold if that happens. And I think we have some hints that it could. And if so, this is kind of the procedure that will happen. Can you summarize the dynamite charge, please, more simply, like a summary? So basically, okay, that's an interesting thought. Let me pull it up, and I'll try to do that. All right. So put simply, let's see, what would it be? Okay, it would be, so don't think that you have to, everybody has to think for themselves. Sure. Everybody has to think about that. But don't be thinking that there is some magic jury out there that is going to be able to figure this out. You are the ones who have been assigned to do this. So don't be thinking that everybody else out there is smarter, that there's some other jury out there that are going to be able to handle this. Instead, you, the people right there, you need to agree, if at all possible. Please agree. Please agree. We all need you to agree, is what this says. And it says, yeah, and listen to the other people around you. Consider the possibility that you might be wrong, even though you think you're correct. Be willing to listen to everybody else. So I'd say, in a nutshell, that's kind of what it is. Has the jury asked the judge any questions? They asked a couple yesterday, Shirley, but none today. Chris, do you think really only 10.5 hours is that long? They've started late, left early, seems longer because of the number of days, not hours. That is definitely true, but I do see it as more than 10.5 hours because they had 2 full days plus a little bit on a third day. So I would say that would be probably, 6, even if you took out lunch, which they probably worked through lunch, 12, 13, 14, 15 maybe hours, something like that. That's nowhere near the longest jury ever to deliberate. One thing to think about is the July 4th holiday that's coming up. And that will probably be a break point at which everybody is going to carefully reevaluate and ask themselves, do we think we can maybe just agree on this? Do we think we can? Or is it time to tell the judge, we just can't, it's not going to work? Okay, what happens with one holdout for conviction? Will they still retry? So, and I think what Jebby is asking is, what if everybody is voting not guilty and one person says, I really think there ought to be a conviction, and that's the reason that the jury is hung? And that's a great question because, like I said, the prosecution doesn't have to prosecute this case. If they conclude it would be inappropriate for whatever reason, they don't have to prosecute Karen again. So what would they do? Would they say, look, 11, we were losing pretty bad here. It was 11-1 against us. This is really not one to retry, and it sure was expensive. And if that happens, they might take that into account. If it was really lopsided like that, if a single juror did. But they don't have to. They don't have to take that into account. They can simply retry it because that's what they're entitled to do under the law. So do jurors get paid if they talk to the Boston Globe or Good Morning America? Okay, wants to know. I guess they could if that's what the Boston Globe or Good Morning America wants to do. I guess they'd be free to accept payment. I don't think there would be some reason that would prevent them from doing that. I don't know if that's the kind of thing that gets paid or not. I don't think the Murdaugh jurors got paid, but I guess I don't know that for absolute sure. Sandra wants to know, do you know how crestfallen all the attorneys looked when they walked back after the judge talked to them at the sidebar? I am going to say I did think, we don't really get to see the prosecutors kind of up close, but I thought that the attorneys looked crestfallen. I did think they did. I agree with you, Sandra. And part of that is just the stress of it all, because they have now been waiting. And once again, it's not going to happen. And it looks like they may not have an easy win or easy decision. It looks like everybody is really digging in, and that would make anybody nervous. We don't know for sure, obviously, what was said during that sidebar. We don't know what the judge said, but I did notice the expressions too, Sandra, and I thought that the same thing you did. Robin asked, do you think someone on the jury is connected to the Canton Police Department? I think it's not being tried in Canton, but certainly people know each other. But I don't think there's any reason to think that people on the jury were planted there somehow. I'm not even sure that would be possible. I haven't seen any evidence of that, so I certainly hope not. I'll put it that way. Okay, let me head over here and answer some questions over here. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. It's me, Mario. I answered that. And thank you, Mary. WM, you are welcome. And thank you about my husband. I appreciate that, WM. Okay. HJ, but MP's initials. I don't know what you're saying. Let's see. HJ, but MP is fired and MH turned states before new. I'm sorry. We're going to have to spell these out. I don't know. I don't know who all that is. So anyway, Michael Proctor, I got the MP. Higgins, maybe? No, that's Brian Higgins. I don't know, Kyle. You're have to decode that for me. You're going to have to write everything out. I need it to be simpler. But thank you for the question and for the super chat. And welcome to our new members. We have a number of new members tonight. That's exciting. So thank you, Bella. We're going to stop there. And oh, well, Rena has a question. Do you think her same attorneys would take her case again if it was a hung jury? I'm sorry about the tough time you're having, Bella. And as far as Rena, I think her same attorneys would take the case? Yes, for a couple of reasons. The first is they know the case, and they were fantastic. They were absolutely great at what they did. So she would want them to take the case. And I think they would want to. It's been excellent publicity for them. I think it will help their careers. They did a great job. And I think people will notice that. I think that new clients will gravitate toward them. So is it desirable for them to try this same case again? No, they definitely want to win this one. They do not want a hung jury, and they don't want to try this case a second time. Nobody would want that. And they obviously don't want to lose. They don't want it to be something where their client gets convicted on any of the counts, including the lesser included offenses. And thank you, Stephanie. Okay, headed back over for some questions. Peggy wants to know about whether Karen should have testified because she would have filled in some holes and it would have humanized her. So this is my thought, Peggy. Usually I'm pretty flexible about if the defendant wants to testify. My view is they can either spend the rest of their lives in prison thinking, dang, I should have testified, or they can really screw up their own case and spend the rest of their lives in prison. Usually the defendant is really behind the eight ball at this stage. And so what does it matter if they get up? They're going to lose. They are going to lose. The chances are something like 98%, and usually it's pretty obvious. This is the one exception to that. I would have insisted that Karen not testify because they did such a good job. I think they are very close to proving that the Commonwealth did not establish her guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. All that could happen is she messes that up. That's the only thing that could happen, or at least the risk is far outweighs any little hole she could have filled. There would have been information they could have crossed her on that she maybe said to the police. It just would have opened up a lot of questions. And so I think she was right to make that choice. I think that was a good move in this particular case. Prodigal mom, the jury is thinking that it may be a guilty verdict due to prejudice. I don't know. We are all waiting to find out. We are all very curious what exactly the jury will do. Robin wants to know whether the jury is hung up on some of the lesser included charges. Very possible, but obviously we don't know. I think by far of course it would be, the hardest charge is the second-degree murder, because that was kind of a stretch for the state to try to get all the way to second-degree murder. But some of the lesser included charges would have been much easier, but they still required the jury to believe that Karen hit John O'Keefe with her car. So that still was the primary focus of the defense, is that didn't happen. That was all planted. She never hit him with her car. So all of those charges go away if she didn't hit him with her car, even the lesser included. Could the jurors be afraid of repercussions? I guess that's possible. And it doesn't even have to be something overt where they're being threatened. It could just be, you live in this community and you have to continue to get along with people. But it's being tried in Norfolk, not directly in like the town of Canton. So there probably are various jurors who don't know any of the people involved and aren't in any way connected. I don't know how well they know each other. Janine asked me, if the jury comes back guilty, not knowing that the feds have investigated and determined she didn't hit him, can this finding be thrown out as Massachusetts is withholding the evidence? The jury has had the evidence from the federal proceeding in front of it. Although they never learned that there is a federal investigation, they did get to see the evidence. So I don't think that the fact that the jury comes back with a guilty verdict and doesn't know that the feds have investigated is enough if they've seen what the evidence that came out was. I don't think the fact of the investigation is strong enough it would change it. All right. Agatha wants to know, have you seen the video explaining about the extreme corruption in Massachusetts State Police? I haven't seen that yet. Selena asked me, if it becomes a retry, can new evidence be entered? Yes, new evidence can be entered. Now, the judge would probably say to everybody, the rulings I made last time, those are still in effect unless you persuade me otherwise, because we aren't going to go through all of these again. But lawyers are lawyers, and they will try to go through anything they lost again. They will make an effort to do that, to come up with something new or some new reason why this or that ought to come in. And there will be changes, whether it be new evidence or just evidence that didn't get in, or simply now everybody understands why some piece of information is relevant or important. There will be some changes. It won't be identical. It never could be. Never could be. And Rosie asks, if she's found not guilty, do you think she's going to sell her story and go on a bunch of talk shows? Well, she well might. She could certainly write an interesting book, I'm sure, about all that she's been through. And maybe she will do. She has, when you think about it, she's already gone on at least one talk show or interview. So would she do more? Very possibly. In fact, I would feel certain she would do at least one. She seems to have a good grasp of using social media and how important that is. And I think most lawyers don't get that, don't really understand how important that is and why it matters so much for their clients, how their clients really have to have a connection into social media. And if they don't, then the prosecution gets to make its big press conference and announce all the charges against the defendant. And that's all the public ever hears. So lawyers aren't really good at that. I did a whole lecture on this. Some of you may have seen it because we broadcast it here on the channel. It was at an undisclosed university because they didn't want anybody to know. And I tell myself that's because they were really worried about paparazzi. But what I was talking about was social media and the law and how I think it's really affecting law. I think it's dramatically changing the whole landscape of law in the US. And I think we're going to have to make a lot of changes, even in our system, to keep up with that and to address that. Elevate wants to know, what do you think the judge said to the attorneys today? They got serious real quick. Indeed. Well, she may have said the jury's having trouble. That was based on her comment. That was my fear about what she was saying. The jury is having trouble disagreeing. And clearly she was not giving them any kind of dynamite charge yet. She was not finding, remember what we saw in those instructions, they said, if you're finding that they haven't concluded yet, then go ahead and put that in the record. So we aren't thinking you should have given them the charge. And so I think she's following the process and she's saying, we are nowhere near the end yet. We are not ending it. I'm making that up. This is just my thought about what's happening, but it is my thought. Angela wants to know, is the judge privy to how the deliberations are currently going? How would she currently know they're having trouble to advise them to clear their heads? I think, Angela, it's certainly she wouldn't have any way to know exactly what's being said inside that room. And there have been situations where bailiffs have listened in. That's really frowned upon, not allowed. So I don't think that's happening here either. Nothing like that is happening. Instead, I think what's happening would be some kind of communication from the jury that says, they're exhausted, something that gave her the impression that this was very, very difficult. And the reason I would conclude that would be is if they're disagreeing. So could it just be me reading it? Yep, sure could be. Sure could be. Heather Skinner, if tried again, would there be a different judge? Should not be. Normally it would be the same judge. They normally wouldn't switch judges. You never know. There might be some reason. Maybe she's retiring or she has a caseload and someone else takes it. But generally speaking, you would send it back to the same judge. One of the reasons being you want this as efficient as possible. And every time you make changes, new lawyers, new judge, you're going to redo a bunch of stuff that got decided last time. Silver Girl says, is this a local jury? It's a state jury pulled into Norfolk. I don't know what their reach is, how big it is. Could they be afraid of public retribution? Maybe, but I'm thinking not. So, Alessandra, Karen is your client. What are you telling her right now? I'm telling her, go home and get a good night's sleep. We do not know what the jury is going to do. Tomorrow is another day. We haven't lost yet. We have not lost. You have not been convicted. You have not been found guilty. So don't go there. Don't go there yet. You don't know what's going to happen. That's what I would say. So Rena is talking about her lawyers. Oh, I don't think I don't think that's how her lawyers are being paid, Rena. Okay, but I do think, I don't think she has the funds to pay for them again is a real concern. This is really expensive. Most individuals would have a very hard time mounting the defense she mounted this time around, much less doing it twice. That would be extremely difficult. It's hard for the state to do. It's hard to find that budget just for the government to do the prosecution, much less for an individual. So I do agree with you, Rita, that is definitely something that is going to be difficult. Bright Blue is saying it's stressful waiting. That is so true. So true. And it's just really brutal. I think the question about what I would tell Karen, that's a pretty good question because it's so stressful on the defendant, even more than anybody else, but also everyone in the courtroom. Like I said, the family members of John O'Keefe, the witnesses who were involved, the lawyers, it's stressful. And of course, the jury, because they know they've got to come back tomorrow and try again. All true, all true. And Patty's Home has been a member for 4 months. Thank you. That's a long time member there. We started right at 4 months ago. So thank you. I'm so glad for that. Okay. So I will take a couple more questions. Isn't the judge aware of the vote counts when the jury votes? Tommy asks. No, she shouldn't be. She shouldn't be told about what that is at all. She should only if the jury communicates something out to her, which normally would not include votes. It would simply be, we don't agree, or we're having a hard time, or can we have this instruction again? Something along those lines. But I don't think she would ever know what their vote count is, unless for some reason they communicated it. She should not know what that is. Sally, what happens if they find Karen guilty, but then during the federal investigation of Proctor, find he did things that were improper and could have led to Karen being framed by him. So what would happen is if it's a hung jury, obviously, then that could come in trial number 2. But Sally's saying, what if she's been convicted? It would then be up to the appellate courts to decide whether that was so significant, so important, that it was worth overturning the entire case and sending it back for a retrial. A lot of times they would conclude this really isn't significant enough that it's worth that. It isn't that important. After all, the defendant already pointed out to the jury that she believed there was planted evidence. The defendant already pointed out to the jury that he said these things about her in private text messages. She had access to all of that. And so the extra information that she was missing, that's not enough. There's a good chance that's what would happen on appeal, since, of course, most appeals lose. It's, less than 50% chance you're going to win an appeal, usually way less than 50% chance. All right, let me make sure I have, okay, good. Thank you, everybody. All right, Rita, what time did John O'Keefe's phone go on lockdown? Wasn't it as she drove off? There was testimony that I think it was at 12:24 that John O'Keefe's phone did not communicate anymore after that, but it recorded steps. So I don't think he used his phone again, but it did record steps again a little bit later, like 10 minutes later, as well as between 12:21 and 12:24, including stairs. That's one of the things I think we'll get into tomorrow. I also have a video planned on Brian Higgins and sort of what the defense has argued about his involvement and whether or not he was involved, and what the defense has argued about Colin Albert. And so I wanted to take a look at those specifically using our fancy timeline that the members helped me create. It's a fantastic timeline. So we'll be going over all that tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern, and I will look forward to seeing you then. Thanks, Marlon and Mama Pink. Mod.